Okay, everyone, good evening. So nice to see you. We're going to conclude our series this evening. We've been discussing different episodes of loss in the Torah and trying to see the way that the Torah, the language that it uses to talk about these different kinds of loss and how different figures in the Torah struggle with those different type losses. And it's in that respect, it's been, I would say, a fairly intense series. Obviously, something which is, really emotional topic. We've talked about the loss of spouses and parents and children. Not an easy topics. Tonight's class, on the other hand, is going to be, I would say, somewhat less charged because we're going to be looking at kind of loss which is not familial. Though that being said, a loss that could still carry with it a great sense of emptiness or loneliness that comes with it. And I actually decided to do this series this month, in a sense, because of this last topic. It's a series I wanted to do, but when I'm kind of thinking what time of year to do it, it was really today's class that made me decide to do it now. And that's because, well, it's now past the nightfall, but today was the 7th of Adar. According to tradition, the 7th of Adar is the time when Moses died. And so I decided that for tonight's class, we would look at that episode and to think about issues around the loss of a mentor, the loss of a rabbi, the loss of someone who gave so much to us, and kind of how do we relate to that type of loss within the tradition, within halakha, within psychology, and I hope that this should also be a meaningful topic for us. Though again, in some ways, obviously less shall we say, painful than some of the other losses. So let's just start with that particular tradition about the 7th of Adar. And this is taken from the Talmud in Kiddushin. Would someone like to read that first source for us? Mom, would you like to read that? We have to unmute you. I can't hear. Can you unmute yourself? Yeah.
All right. You hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, thank you. It is taught in another brisa. I'll say Moshe. Moshe died on the 7th of Adar, and he was likewise born on the 7th of Adar. From where is it derived that Moshe died on the 7th of Adar? As it is stated, so Moshe, the servant of the Lord, died there. That's in Devarim. And it is written, and the children of Israel wept for Moshe in the plains of Moab 30 days. And it is written, now it came to pass after the death of Moshe, the servant of the Lord, it's now Yehoshua, and it is written, Moshe, my servant, is dead. Now arise, cross this Jordan.
All right, so you got to pay attention to this because now I'm going to try to calculate dates backwards.
All right, shall I go on? All
yeah,
right.
please. Yeah.
The brisa continues, and it is written, pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, saying, prepare your victuals, for within 3 days you are to cross the Jordan. And it is written, and the people came up out of the Jordan on the 10th day of the first month. Subtract retroactively from that date, the 10th of Nisan, the last 33 days. That is the 30 days of mourning for Moshe and the 3 days of preparation before crossing the Jordan. And you learn from here that Moshe died on the 7th of Adar.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So it calculates out that Moshe died on the 7th of Adar because we know they mourned for 30 days, and then it took 3 more days from the cross, and we know that that was the 10th of Nisan. So you take away 33 days, and you get to the 7th of, yeah, and you end up getting to the 7th of Adar. So that's the source for this tradition, that the 7th of Adar was the time that Moshe died. The Talmud continues and it tries to prove how it knows that he was also born on that day. And it basically says, he lived like a complete life. So it must be that his, complete meaning he died on the day that he was born as well. So it was like really rounded out exactly 120. That being said, we're going to look at the verses that surround his death. But what's interesting is that as a result of this tradition, there has been a tradition that's developed for many Chevra Kadishas, right? Many burial societies to gather on the 7th of Adar and actually to use it like as a day of, I don't know if celebration is quite the right word, but as a day where they gather and they kind of, shall we say, I don't know, give honor to all of those who contribute their time to this, to the holy work of preparing the dead for burial. Some communities, it becomes they'll do like a very fancy dinner to do it. When I was in Prague a number of years ago, they said that the Chevra Kadisha there had a set of china, beautiful set of china that they only used on the 7th of Adar. It was for one day a year, and in that community, to be on the Chevra Kadisha, you had to be like a major person in the community. It was like, you had to be like wealthy. You had to be like, it was considered to be like the sense that it was a privilege. You had to like somehow earn your right to be a part of it. So, well, we don't have that barrier of entry nowadays. It does give a sense about the fact that it is considered to be something quite holy, quite significant, and it is a great privilege to be part of it. And as I said, the tradition is at the 7th of Adar because that was the anniversary of the death of Moshe, that many of them use that date to kind of have their annual dinner. Interestingly, that's not the case here in London in the Spanish and Portuguese. They mark it on Hanukkah, and I don't yet know why. I haven't yet explored other Spanish and Portuguese communities to know whether they too mark on Hanukkah or whether that's kind of just a London thing that kind of developed. But I discussed it with the Chevra Kadisha here. They told me that that's not the custom here. So any case, let's take a look at it though. Obviously what we just read referenced some of the verses about the death of Moshe. Let's now take a look and read what it says ourselves. So would someone like to read source number 2 for us, please? Eve, would you like to take the reins? Yeah. Anybody would like, please go ahead.
Paul said that
Go for it, Paul.
All right. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the command of the Lord. He buried him in the valley of the land of Moab near Beth-Peor. And no one knows his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. And the Israelites bewailed Moses in the steppes of Moab for 30 days. The period of wailing and mourning for Moses came to an end.
Okay, thank you, Paul. So obviously what we see over here is this period of mourning that takes place after his death. And it's a period of mourning which we're familiar with, right? What's the term we use for this?
Shloshim.
Right, the Shloshim, the 30 days. So you don't see here a reference to Shiva and things like that. Presumably his family, right, did Shiva, but the idea that all of Israel also mourned for these 30 days. And so it kind of makes you take a step back, right, when you know the tradition of Judaism, and to say it sounds like everybody mourned, that everyone participated in this, shall we say, ritual mourning of the Shloshim, right? It doesn't just, it gives you a sense that like it wasn't just this like they were sad for 30 days and then magically they weren't sad after 30 days. That no, like they were doing this like ritual thing of 30 days of mourning, right? And so the question is well, why, right? Moshe wasn't there. Except for the few people that he was, right? For most people, Moshe wasn't their father, right? He wasn't their spouse. He wasn't. Why would they be mourning in a ritual way for Moshe? Right? That's kind of the question that you ask. Now, again, you could just say it's 30 days. That's just kind of how long it went and whatever. But you get the sense, again, because our tradition makes a big deal about 30 days, that there was something that they were it was a formal kind of mourning that they were doing. Does anyone have any thoughts on this?
Is there a connection to the fact that they mourn for Moshe for 30 days, and that we do, apart from if it's a parent, that we mourn for our close ones for 30 days?
Yeah, so right. I think that's exactly the point, right? This seems like a real kind of mourning, not just like I agree. Like we find this for all relatives, this kind of mourning. It's interesting the Torah makes the point, right, that he wasn't ill, he hadn't slowed, right? It was his designated time to die, which is why the Talmud later says that he also this must have been exactly 120, that God like specifically calculated it out. And that's how we know he must have also been born on the 7th of Adar too. I have heard that there is some place that people do say is the place where Moshe was buried, and there's some kind of like thing you can visit there in Jordan. Mom, do you know anything about that? You have to unmute yourself. Can't hear you.
I think Muslims go there, and apparently, it says later on in Devarim, before he passes away, that he goes up to the on this mountaintop, and he looks, and there he can see spread out before him all of the land of Israel. And in fact, that is true, because I read an account of somebody who was able to go there, and like this individual was like just amazed at the magnificent, you just see the land of Israel and all its beauty spread out from on top of Har Nevo.
Right, amazing. Yeah. So
I've been there. It's true.
Oh,
Andrew, you were there.
I was there. Yeah, I've been there. It's true. But I don't remember there being a sort of burial site on there, but there is definitely obviously the tie to his dying there, and then also the viewpoint that looks out over Israel, which is quite impressive.
We'll have to take a trip to Jordan. Okay, so let's carry on. So moving on. So the question is why is there this mourning for Moshe in this kind of way? So there's a source that I'd like to take a look. This is from Rambam, from Maimonides, right? In his halachic work, the Mishneh Torah, and his Laws of Talmud Torah, the Laws of the Study of Torah, Chapter 5, Law 8. Would someone like to read that? It's a short one.
Okay, I'll read it.
Okay.
At the demise of his master, he should rend all of his garments until his chest be exposed, and he should never mend the garments. Whereat are these words directed? only respecting his true master, of whom he learned most of his wisdom.
Okay, thank you. So this is an interesting source. It's based on a teaching in the Talmud that says that if a person's Rav, right, if a person's rabbi dies, that a person should do kriyah, right, that a person should rent their garments, right, in the same way that a person does when they lose an immediate relative. And it says not to any rabbi you know, not any rabbi you've ever had, right? The rabbi that has been your primary teacher, right? So not everybody necessarily has a rabbi of in that way, because maybe, you know, every year of your life you studied from a different rabbi and you may not have like your primary rabbi, but some people do. Some people, you know, maybe studied by one rabbi for 10 years or something like that, or, you know, was the rabbi of their community for their whole life, you know, and so there is that sense that this is, you know, my rabbi, and that there is this halacha that you rend your garment. Now, you don't do shiva, you don't have the whole thing. There's an idea that maybe you sit in mourning for that day as well, perhaps. So you kind of have like an abbreviated shiva, right, for a half a day or whatever it is, but that you rend your garments. So there is in the halakha this notion of rending your garments, So the question is why? It's not your family, right? It's not, you know, an immediate relative. So why would there be this, shall we say, formal mourning associated with the death of, you know, a religious mentor? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think you're just showing this, you owe so much to the person you've become because of this individual, and you're showing him this utmost respect by tearing your garment.
Right, interesting. Right, so part of it could be right. It could be a sign of respect that you do this to show that this person had meant so much to you. Yeah, maybe. And anyone have any other thoughts on what might be happening here?
Could be the loss of the education side, because you're viewing that Torah is really the ultimate knowledge and important for life and relationship with God. You've lost that relationship in a way. Died. He hasn't died, but you've got the loss of the teacher that was imparting that knowledge.
Right. So there's almost like this sense that it's not even about the person, it's about like the Torah that they have. Yeah. Interesting. Anyone have any other thoughts on what this might be about? So let's take a look at a source in the Talmud where this originates from. And I think there's something interesting in there. I don't know that it answers it 100%, but I think it gives us something to think about from the context in which this ruling originates. Okay, and this is in the tractate of Moed Katan in the Talmud, and I believe is that today or tomorrow's page in the Daf Yomi? Yeah. So this is where in the 7-year cycle they're on this page now. So it's the timing is works out I think quite well actually for our class. So it says the following. Would someone like to read this for us?
I'll read it, Rabbi.
Great, thank you, Dorothy.
Yeah. And these are the rents of mourning, that they may never be properly mended.
Right, so meaning if you've torn kriya, don't tie it, don't sew it back up, right? This is once you do it, you've done it.
Yeah.
Okay.
One who rends his garments for the death of his father, or for his mother, or for his teacher who taught him Torah, or for the Nasi, or for the president of the court, or upon hearing evil tidings, or hearing God's name being blessed.
By being blessed, it means not being blessed. It just doesn't want to say the opposite. So it says the positive, but it means the negative. Yeah.
Which is a euphemism for hearing God's name being cursed, or when a Torah scroll has been burned, or seeing the cities of Judah that were destroyed, or the destroyed temple, or Jerusalem in ruins.
Right, thank you. So it's interesting. It lists here a whole bunch of different scenarios in which one is meant to do Kriya. And some people still do some of these when they'll go to Jerusalem, or they'll go visit the Kotel, and they will rend their garment.
It was yesterday's. It was yesterday's.
Yesterday, okay. Thank you. They will rend their garments even nowadays. Now that despite the fact that Jerusalem has been rebuilt, but obviously the temple hasn't been, so they will rend their garments, which is good timing. If anyone saw the BBC video today about people praying on the Temple Mount, for those who saw it, you know what I'm talking about. So but one of the examples over here, right? It mentions the idea about a person's rabbi dying. But it also says, and this is what I was thinking, that's why I thought kind of maybe what Paul was alluding to, right? This idea that if a Torah scroll is destroyed, right, that you also do Kriya. And so perhaps there's that element that, if your rabbi dies, then you tear Kriya, because it says if the Torah has been destroyed. And there's just like sense of loss over that loss and what that means to you as the recipient of Torah from this particular individual. And I thought that might be part of the explanation for the mourning around the death of Moshe. Because of course, Moshe, we refer to Moshe as Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Moses, our teacher, as he's the person who received the Torah on our behalf and taught the Torah to the people. And so maybe, especially with Moshe, there was this added element of mourning to be associated with him because of his role in the giving of the Torah. And for everyone, he was therefore their primary teacher of Torah, right? He was the primary person. And so maybe there's that notion that for everyone, their Rebbe, right, their rabbi had died, and they needed to engage in this mourning around his death. So that was just one element that I was thinking about to kind of understand, what's happening with this national mourning around the death of Moshe, right? Not just, he's a leader, and so we're going to mourn him, but it was a religious leader, right? And so there was this added significance to the loss associated with his death. Okay. What I want to do, though, is take a look at another source with you that perhaps complicates this picture a little bit. But does anyone have any thoughts before we go on to the next source? I'm always happy for this to be a bit interactive. Okay. If at any point someone has questions, yeah, please go ahead.
Sorry,
Unmute
Rabbi.
yourself. Yeah.
So was this, I mean, in recent years, there have been some great Rabbanim who have passed away. I mean, I never saw, did people tear their garments?
I think so. I think I have heard that, if like someone was like, their rabbi for, decades from yeshiva or whatever, I have heard of people doing kriya on those occasions. I don't know how widespread it is, but I do think some people will do this. Yeah.
Rabbi, is there not a connection also between the dying of Miriam and Aaron? Because Aaron was the one who always made peace, and Miriam had the merit of them having the water. They all also mourned for her and for Aaron, but probably, I don't know, probably not as intensively. I don't know.
Yeah, we'll take a look. Actually, I'm going to take a look at the death of Aaron in a second.
Oh, sorry.
That's what that next source is. So very good, Dorothy. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, not at all. That's great. That's great. Yeah, anybody else have any thoughts?
No,
or-
as your mother said, the few great rabbis have died in the last couple of years. And I know that my eldest grandson studied in Ma'ale Adumim, and I don't think he actually did Kriyab when I think it was Rav Rubenstein died, and I think apparently he did talk about it, and I'd never heard that before. So this is very interesting what you're telling us. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're welcome. It'd be interesting to know in the yeshiva if anybody did. Maybe not someone who's young, but maybe someone who's been there for a long time. Maybe I don't know. It'd
Right.
be interesting to know if any of them did actually do that. Good. So let's go on then, because we're going to look at another case now, which is the death of Aaron. Dorothy, do you want to read that since you evoked it?
Yeah. Moses did as the Lord commanded. They ascended Mount Hor in the sight of the whole community. Moses stripped Aaron of his vestments and put them on his son Eleazar. And Aaron died there on the summit of the mountain. When Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain, the whole community knew that Aaron had breathed his last. All the house of Israel bewailed Aaron 30 days.
Thank you. So it's interesting because you said, did they mourn as intensely? And the truth is, how long does it say they mourned for?
The 30 days.
For 30 days, right? Which is the same that it says around the death of Moshe, that they also mourned for 30 days. So it actually seems that there was a similar mourning also around Aaron, which is interesting. Now, if you take a look at the description of the mourning, it says it's almost exactly the same, but slightly different. So let's just take a look back and read again from Deuteronomy. Does someone want to read that for us again? Was that you, Paul?
Yeah, from the beginning.
Sure.
Yeah. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab at the command of the Lord. He buried him in the valley of the land of Moab, near Beth Hor. No one knows his burial place to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. And all the Israelites bewailed Moses in the steppes of Moab for 30 days. The period of wailing and mourning for Moses came to an end.
Okay. So do you see any differences?
There isn't a preparation for the death of Moses.
Okay.
He just dies, whereas Aaron, there's an actual ritualistic passing on of his role.
Yeah.
With
Yeah,
his clothing,
definitely.
etc. We don't know where he's buried, it says there. Well, Aaron, it doesn't say that he was buried there, I don't think. But he died on the mountain top.
Ironically, you slightly misread the source to make it say the same thing as with the death of Aaron,
Right.
though it actually says it slightly differently. But when you actually read it the way that it says by Aaron. Did anybody pick up on that?
Pick up the text. I can't see the bottom one.
He's got wailing and mourning for Moses. Bewailed is Aaron.
Yeah, wailing.
Yeah, that's true, right? It almost has that more intense kind of language by Moshe, but there's one important other difference.
I can't see them both at the same time.
Yeah, it's a bit tricky. So the difference is if you look in the verse when it talks about Bet Yisrael, when it talks about Moshe, right? It says Vayivku b'nei Yisrael, right? That b'nei Yisrael cried.
Mhm.
And when it says by Aaron, it says who cried? Kol Beit Yisrael. All of the house of Israel.
No.
So the Midrash loves these things and tries to pick up on why by Moshe does it say Bet Yisrael, but by or Bnei Yisrael, but by Aaron it says Kol Beit Yisrael, all the house of Israel. Right. So one says the children of Israel, one says all the house of Israel. So the Midrash says the description of Aaron is more inclusive. It's more inclusive than Moshe. Why? Because the people loved Aaron even more than they loved Moshe. Why did they love Aaron? Well, because of what Dorothy said. There is this tradition that Aaron was Ohev Shalom V'rodef Shalom, right? That he loved Shalom, right? He loved peace, and he was proactive in creating harmony in households between husband and wife, which perhaps is also the reference to Bet Yisrael, the house of Israel, not just Bnei Israel, the children of Israel. So there's this idea that like all the households of Israel adored Aaron in a, like this more personal kind of way than they did with Moshe. So they mourned Moshe as well for 30 days, but there was like this somehow a broader mourning that happens with Aaron, which really just underscores that not every leader is the same. Not every leader is the same, and we'll go back and reflect on this in a moment. But that made me think of a well-known verse. It's the final verse in the book of Esther. Would someone like to read this? This is the final verse in the book of Esther. Source 6.
Okay. For Mordecai the Jew ranked next to King Ahasuerus and was highly regarded by the Jews and popular with a multitude of his brethren. He sought the good of his people and interceded for the welfare of all his kindred.
Right. So this is like a crazy pasuk, because here you have Mordecai, who's just like saved, the Jewish people with Esther. And it says, Ratzoi lirov echav, that he was like regarded, he was favored by many of his brothers, or the majority of his brothers, which implies that there was a minority that didn't like him very much. So I've heard some people when I was in rabbinic school, they had someone speak to us and they said, if everybody likes you, you're doing something wrong. If you're there's always going to be some people that are not going to like what you're doing. If you're pushing people, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I think if you do a good job, you can win everybody over. But it is interesting, right? That like it's tall order. It's tall order that everyone is going to love you. So even with Moshe, who gave the Torah, there's still this sense that there were people who mourned even more for Aaron than they did for Moshe, which I think is like an interesting. I don't see that as a negative. I see that as like a really interesting lesson that the Torah is telling us. That like maybe is downplaying veneration, is like almost telling us that like at the end of the day, a person is still a person. You don't turn a person into God, right? Even Moshe was not God, right? Moshe was still just a human being, right? And as great as he was, doesn't mean he was the best at everything. There were certain things that Aaron was better at doing than Moshe was at. And it's almost in there like this lesson around it. And I think that is interesting then how it plays into this notion of mourning around a teacher, right? That when a person loses a teacher, it is not the same mourning as around a parent or an immediate relative. There's a level of mourning because there's a sense of loss, but like we don't turn, rabbis and figures like that into something else. And I think some communities can have a problem with that sometimes, where they do kind of glorify figures. And the Torah, I think in that sense, is very sobering about that. Even Moshe did not get Kol Beit Yisrael. He only had Bnei Yisrael, not Kol Beit Yisrael. Even Mordechai only had most of the people liked him, not all of the people that liked him. And so while there is this notion of mourning for a rabbi, it's still not the mourning of a parent, right? It's still not as personal as that loss. And the loss of a family member obviously pains a person in a completely different kind of way than the loss of a teacher, which I think is an interesting idea, because I mentioned this, I think, in one of the previous lectures. It's a phrase that Andrea introduced me to, that she had heard from a friend, right? The difference between someone's biological family and someone's logical family, right? Where your biological family is the family you're born into. The logical family are the people that you choose to have in your life, right? But you're not related to them. And in some ways, the people you choose in your life, you would say, those are the deeper relationships, right? Those are the relationships where you've chosen these people as your friends, as your teachers, and things like that. Your family, you don't have any choice. And yet we find that the mourning over the people that you didn't have choice over, save your spouse, right, is greater than the mourning over the people that you chose, like your rabbi, right? You chose that this person would be your teacher. And so the question is why? And maybe this is psychological, but why is it that the mourning for family, you don't have any choice over, it just happens to be, the luck of the draw, fate, what God decided, however you think about it. And yet the people who you've chosen, the mourning is absent or far reduced. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think as far as mourning for one's parents, which is, the longest, it's a full year. You talked obviously about the loss of a child. Of course, that you will mourn for the loss of that child, almost like a forever thing, but you owe respect to your parents for having raised you. And I think that's why we're obligated to mourn for that full year, that entire time, be thinking of them and the impact they have had on us. And whereas some other relatives that you might mourn very emotionally, very deeply, you don't have to be commanded to mourn for them for a full year, because of course you're going to. But for your parents, you might have a more difficult relationship perhaps, but because they are your parents, you owe that to them, and that's why you have to mourn for them for a full year.
Right. Very interesting. So I think what I'm also wondering is, there's clearly a difference between the length of mourning for a parent and other immediate relatives. But all of those people have a measure of mourning around them. But then you have other people in your life where there's no mourning for. So the question is that logical? That in a sense, the people you didn't have any choice of being in your life, those are the people you mourn, and the people who you had choice over are not the people that you actually mourn in any kind of ritual type of way.
Maybe it's, but you can see it's particularly in the Torah, and where society is structured on the family, such as the respect for parents and the Ten Commandments, the laws of inheritance, the passing on of land, the rights of wives, etc., and daughters. It's really imbibed throughout the whole of the Torah. It seems to be a very basic, central premise in which social structure is constructed. So,
Right? You think it might be almost like a necessity?
Yeah,
Okay.
But I think you're trying to say is actually a very interesting point, because I think I have some very close friends, and I think if, God forbid, they go, I'd be devastated, and maybe more so than certain other relative. I can't know, but I think it's a very interesting point, the idea of the biological and the logical. It's a very interesting idea.
Anybody have any other thoughts? Dorothy, you have any thoughts on this? It's
quite a difficult parallel to make, but I have experienced in the last few months a very good friend of mine passed away. And there were days after her passing that I just walked around in a daze. Now, I know I had a different reaction when both parents passed away and when my brother passed away. But this kind of showed the, how can I say, the frailty of life, that one had to be even more aware of the gift of life, that one needed to be more engaged with life and to be grateful for whatever one achieved, to look at things not so much in a negative way, but in a more positive way, to say, well, at least this person was in my life for over 50 years and we were good friends. We may not have always, as in any relationship, always agreed, but there was that bond, and a different kind of bond from parents to siblings. Yeah. That's how I kind of envisage that, because with Moses, he was the younger brother. Eliezer was, I would say, more of no, not Eliezer, Aaron was more a people's person. Sometimes Moses withdrew from the people, and unfortunately he was criticized. He had his reasons for doing that, whereas Aaron was always, I would say, always with people, and therefore the people could relate more to him. Maybe they held Moses in great awe. I don't know.
Okay, thank you, Dorothy. I think there's a number of different ways of looking at all of this. On one level, you can say, like my mother was saying, that perhaps to our family we have a duty, a responsibility, to them. Like if we're not going to mourn for them, who is? Like it's our job to show them honor and to show them respect by mourning for them as their children, as their whatever family relationship that we have. I think another possibility is that it's just natural. When that, yes, it may be your biological family, not your logical family, but there's a natural thing. This is your family. So you naturally have a sense of mourning for the loss of a relative, or even if you have a great friend, or someone that you've known that you're close to or whatever, of course you're sad. Of course it's devastating, but in some ways, obviously, it's still different than your family, right? That maybe there is this just natural sense of like, oh my God, this is my family, and you just naturally have those feelings. And so the tradition kind of helps you process those feelings through these rituals, and maybe with other people, because it's a different kind of feeling, those rituals are not as necessary. You work it through on your own with your own mourning, but not through a ritualized mourning. I think another possibility is that when it comes to family, maybe specifically because they're not the people that you chose, but they're obviously the people that you are deeply connected to on the most basic, human level, right? Biological level, you almost need to process that loss. With someone who you've been best friends with for 50 years. So you've chosen that person, you love that person, you have a close relationship with that person. So maybe there's like, you don't need ritual for that. You're going to process that, you're going to feel that, but maybe it's for the people in your life who you're like, you are connected to, and maybe sometimes it's complicated, that you in a sense, you need to process it. It actually, if you didn't have the rituals forcing you to process it, maybe you would just be like, nah, I wasn't close with that relative, and go on. But we know that that's false. If this is your parent, if this is your sibling, even if you didn't get along, there is still stuff to unpack, in those relationships, no matter what the nature of those relationships were. And maybe, especially if those relationships were not good, there's even more to unpack, in those relationships. Because obviously most people in the world, if you don't have a good relationship, you have nothing to do with them. But with family, if you don't have a good relationship, it doesn't matter. It's still, it's still your family. So maybe in those situations, there's even more this, necessity that there is a mourning, an avelut, to work through, to really kind of round out, or to process those different losses, right? We mentioned that, it could be that's why Ishmael buries Avraham. Maybe not for Avraham's sake, maybe for his sake. He needs that closure. Maybe Esau shows up to bury Yitzchak because he needs that closure, right? There is that element that sometimes, we mourn also because maybe we need to do that mourning. It's important for us to do that. And maybe with other people in our lives that we chose, it's less important, because we'll naturally, so we say, mourn those losses. It's hard. Every relationship is different. Every relationship between parents and their children are different from family to family. So there is no, one answer, I think, for a question like this. I think all we can do is look at the tradition and think about, why it might be that case and how it is that we might relate to it. I think what's beautiful about this episode of Moshe and Aaron and Miriam is that there is the sense that if somebody teaches you, if there is somebody that you learn from, there is an element that relationship is akin to what a parent-child relationship should be, right? Where it is loving, and there is a giving, and there is a receiving. And even as we say, by teaching, I learn more from my students than from anyone. And even when a parent-child, that parents learn from their children. And there is this, kind of mutual relationship that ultimately develops. And I think what it's actually trying to say is that, that's the ultimate family relationships, where it is a relationship where we are learning from one another, and we are teaching, and we are growing with one another. And it's almost the relationship of a teacher and the student. It's almost like it can have an element of what a family relationship should look like. It's not going to be as much. There's no way that, even a person who studies by his rabbi for 10 years, it's not the same thing as the relationship between a parent and a child who, taught the child how to do everything, how to walk, like the most basic of things the parent teaches to their child. And I think in some sense, it's not elevating the rabbi-student relationship by saying this level of mourning. It's actually highlighting how much even more significant the family relationship is. That's a full-blown mourning. And with the Rebbe and a parent, and a student, there's almost an aspect of that type of family relationship. And so there's a measure of mourning associated with it, but it's still not the same as what we learn from our relatives. It certainly does underscore how precious the relationship is between a rabbi and a student. What that means to give, to teach, to learn, and so forth. That really is something so precious, and something that should never be taken for granted. And it's why our tradition has this idea that a person should always have a rabbi, that a person should always, be learning, because that's so core, to what life as a Jew should be about learning, should be about growing, should be about striving, should be about bettering ourselves. And so that relationship is so beautiful and so important. And And that's why I think the Torah stresses to us about Moshe, and then even Aaron and Miriam, that all these people that we learned from, that we gained from, there is a mourning with that, and that we're meant to seek out those kinds of relationships because they are so essential to the life of a Jewish person. And so it's interesting, I think, how sometimes through looking at loss or the rituals around loss can actually tell us about how precious these relationships are meant to be in life. And that it shouldn't be that we only, shall we say, appreciate those relationships when they're gone, but the rituals around what we do when those relationships are gone are meant to perhaps even remind us before that happens that to really embrace and to make the most of all of those relationships. And I think often in life, people take those relationships for granted, whether it's the biological ones or the logical ones. And the point is to always kind of invest and connect with those relationships, because those are the most precious things in life, are the relationships that we build, whether that's family or whether that's communal, as a rabbi to my congregants. I mean, those are the most precious things, are the relationships that are built. And those relationships are so precious that there's even rules of mourning that we codify because they are things that can never and should never be taken for granted. So I hope that this course has been a meaningful course of study for everyone. It certainly has been for me. And sometimes these are, like I said at the beginning, these are difficult topics to think about. But they're actually the most important ones to talk about because they really get to the very core of life. And if we kind of ignore the most important things, then we actually miss out on the most important things too. So thank you all so much for studying with me. And I look forward to seeing those of you who are in town soon. And please God, I haven't yet put out what the next series of learning will be, but please God, in the next month or so, I'll put out the next course of study.
Thank you very much. That was actually really interesting.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
And
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.